Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Brian Thatcher, and welcome to this week's episode of Hope, Healing, and Mercy. Today with me, I have a special guest, Lisa Kratz Thomas. And I thought it was important to bring her on at this time because the world is in need of hope. The world is in need of battling. How do we battle the discouragement, the anxieties, the fears we have? And her story is a remarkable one. And she's going to talk to us about how she got off track, but even more importantly, how she got back on track. I'm reminded of the quote, every saint had a past and every sinner has a future. And hope is one of the three theological virtues. And it responds to the aspiration for happiness. And that's what we're all searching for, happiness, which God has placed in the hearts of every man. It keeps man from discouragement. The Lord told St. Faustina, a nun from Poland, nearly 100 years ago, that mankind will not have peace until it turns with trust or confidence in his mercy. There's no sin we can commit that is as great as his love and mercy for us. And that's something we all have to remember. Years ago, we were putting on a conference here in Tampa. And I remember people telling me, "Oh, I can't go to your conference. I'm not holy enough." And I thought, no, you're missing the whole point. This is exactly why we're trying to do this. It's our own path and journey and struggle for holiness. So today, as I said, we have Lisa Kratz Thomas. She has an amazing story, and I'm going to let her share with it. She has written a book that's available at Lisa Kratz, Kratz Thomas.com, and the title is Light in Our Darkness, and you can get it at lisakratzthomas.com. Lisa, just start out and tell us a little bit about yourself and some of the early road of your journey.
Well, I'd love to. Thanks for having me on, Brian, because I so agree with you that we are in so need of hope and of a savior. And, I always am comforted by the thought that Jesus came to seek and save the lost. And I'll tell you, boy, was I lost. I grew up, I think that stories really help people understand. And so I think they save lives. They can change lives. I mean, Jesus used parables. And they just relate so deep to our man. And so I'm just going to tell a little story from my past. And, I went to a Catholic school as a young girl. And back in the day when I went to school, to kindergarten, you could walk to school by yourself. There was no problem with my mom's kissing me in the morning and I'd take off and go to school. So, I'd go to school and every day I'd walk and I'd come home and I would cross over this little bridge that connected two sides of a brook. And I walked to that path every day. And one day I stopped and I looked into that water and I thought, if I fell in, nobody would miss me. And my second thought, now I was 5 years old, my second thought was, if I fell in, the world would be better off. Those are devastating thoughts, I think, for a 5-year-old little girl. And I have people ask me all the time, well, Lisa, why did you feel that way? Why did you even stop and think that? And this is what I believe, that, the enemy is always trying to steal our soul. And it starts from the very beginning of our birth. And I believe that it was just this innate feeling that I was not a good girl. And I had two parents that were very loving parents. But there were things that happened along the way that kind of kept me into this concept of not being a good girl. And it's two separate incidents. And I think these are really important because I think sometimes we can look at things and we can pass them by as though they have no meaning in our life, or they don't have they don't take root. And, as we know, we have to get down to the root of an issue before we can let it go. So two of the things that really stuck out in my mind as I started to go through this in later life. One day I was walking home, walked over the bridge, walked up to the top of the hill, and I saw a bunch of kids around a trash can. and they were looking in this trash can so intently. And I'm kind of, well, my mother used to say I was a mother hen. I'd prefer to say I had strong leadership qualities. But I went in and I moved the kids out of the way because I wanted to see what they were looking at. And it was a trash can full of pornographic pictures. And as a 5-year-old child, I immediately looked. And when I turned away, the guilt that I felt was so intense. And I wanted to tell my mom, but we didn't have that kind of relationship. I didn't feel I could. Then about 2 weeks after that, I was at a girlfriend's house, just one of my little playmates, and her 12-year-old brother came down and exposed himself to us. Now, in itself, you could look at those two things and say, well, every kid's probably come across those situations. You're probably right, but not everybody perceives things and looks at things in the same way. These two circumstances kind of sealed the fact that I grew up in a home with love, but it was very conditional. If I behaved, if I didn't cause any issues, if I was quiet, if I just did what my parents wanted me to do, I felt very loved and very accepted. But anytime I did anything that was out of those boundaries, I was told that I was a bad little girl. And at this time, with all this going on, I just perceived it as to be true. I also grew up in an atmosphere where I really didn't know, I didn't have a personal relationship with Jesus. And I don't believe at the time that my parents did either. Now, look, I first want to make a disclaimer. My parents did a better job than they probably ever should have been able to do with 4 kids. When I look at their background, what they grew up with, it is remarkable that how well taken care of we were. But, we're all humans and none of us are perfect. And so these were the things that started to have a foothold in my life. I really felt like I was bad and that, God made 2 kinds of people. He made good people and he made bad people. And I just happened to be one of those bad people. So, of course, with that feeling, I started, acting out, and I started looking for ways outside of myself to fill that inadequacy that I felt inside. Now, I say this took me years to be able to look back and to gain this insight. But, Brian, I've talked across the country. I've had the opportunity to share with a lot of people. And this part of my story resonates so deeply because we can all look back and think about someone that spoke a word, a negative word into our life, or just didn't, show us that unconditional love. A teacher could have said, you're never going to amount to anything. Your uncle could have said, you're just like your father, whatever. Yeah. And as a child, those things have such a great impression on us. Our words have so much power. That's why it's so important to read the Word of God, because it helps empower you to use the words that Jesus uses that can literally change how we think and how we interact with others. So that was kind of the early part of how I started to view who I was and how uncomfortable I was in my own skin. And I can tell you, the first opportunity that I had to experience something different, I took it.
I'm sure we'll get into then what comes next, but it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. I'm bad, and then you act badly. See, I told you I'm bad, and it feeds on itself, and it's like a monster that keeps consuming. And where did you go then? What happened?
So here's what started happening. So it was the early 1970s, and I was introduced to alcohol, of course, and I started drinking. And I remember the first time that I drank. When that alcohol, I was 14. When that alcohol hit my system, I literally felt like I was 6 foot tall and bulletproof, that every inadequacy, every bit of low self-worth was eradicated. I felt like this is who I've always wanted to be. Of course, until 2 hours later when, I was throwing up and the room was spinning and everything else. And of course, I vowed I would never drink again. But that feeling, that freedom that I felt, it called me back. It called me back. So then, of course, I started smoking pot. And again, it was another level of freedom. And when you cross these lines that God never intended for us to cross, it opens us up to so many things from the enemy. And so, I was drinking, I was smoking pot, and then of course the next, situation in my life was to start having sex. So at age 14, I lost my virginity. I mean, the most precious thing that God gave me, I just threw it away. And at that time, the women's lib movement was pushing hard. I am woman, baby. Hear me roar. And I was always one of those gals that I latched on to anything that was impassioned. I mean, Helen Reddy was singing the national anthem as far as I was concerned. And I just felt that I was alive, and I was being pushed into this environment where I could be somebody. Although I didn't know who that somebody was, my life was always based off feelings and emotions. And as I know today, feelings and emotions can change with a phone call or an email. So when you live your life that way, you don't have any foundation, you're constantly moving and swaying. And so, fast forward, I graduated from high school. I had several jobs, and then I got involved with cocaine, and I started using crack cocaine. And then I started working in, bars and adult clubs and things like that, because that was the only atmosphere that would support my lifestyle. There's not many places that you can get up at 4 p.m. and stay up all night and drink and party and whatever. And so I did. And, during that time, I had many interactions with men. And I met a man, actually a Black man. And in the early 80s, that was totally taboo. But always wanted something that was unique, something that would separate me from the crowd. And what's so sad about that is God made us all so unique that I was already separate from the crowd. But I just didn't know that. I felt so bad about myself because I really felt that there wasn't anybody who loved me for me. So and that's the story. I mean, all you have to do is pick up magazines going through the checkout line at the grocery store. You want to get skinnier, you want to have no wrinkles, you want to be more attractive, you want to be sexier, do this, and this. And it's such an illusion because you can never be the things that society wants you to be. And so I felt so empty inside, Brian. And that led me into a relationship with this man who I totally loved, but we both were hooked on crack. That evolved into us being homeless and living on the streets of Washington, D.C. And, when you are desperate, people do desperate things. And I've always remembered that as I've moved on in my life, because when I see people and I want to be judgmental about them, I need to walk a mile in their shoes. And I have to say, okay, where is their mind? Where are they? How desperate are they in their everyday life? And I got to tell you, I was desperate. So I couldn't hold a job. It's hard to hold a job and be a drug addict. And so you resort to things that you just never thought you would resort to. I can tell you when I drank that first bottle of Boone's Farm Strawberry Hill and I felt that freedom, you could have never told me that 15 years later, I would be standing on the corner of Rhode Island and 4th selling my body for $20. You could have never told me that. But that's where the progression of this low self-worth and this feeling of love starvation took me. And of course, the more you do, you're in this vicious cycle. So I would get high, go out and prostitute myself, come back. I had and get beat up by my boyfriend turned pimp. And then I would do the same thing all over again because I would have to drown out those voices in my head of low self-worth. And this went on for consecutively for 2 years, and the beatings had started way before that. But I had convinced myself that nobody lived the way that we lived, and that this was who I was meant to be with. And I would accept the apologies. I mean, broken nose, black eyes, knots, broken ribs, knots on the head, whatever you could imagine. I was willing to endure for those 10 to 20 minutes of escape that I gained through drugs and alcohol. Well, the law caught up with me, and I have to say thank God for that. But the law caught up with me, and I was incarcerated in Arlington County Jail, Virginia, for a year. And I just have to say that was the thing that led to the thing that led to the thing. And I always tell anybody who has a loved one that has been incarcerated, don't think it's the worst thing that could happen to them, because I can tell you it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Because at the time, Brian, I had nowhere to go. My family didn't know where I was. I had removed myself from every relationship in my life. It was just me and my pimp. And it was the first time in years that I was in a secluded place. I felt safe and I wasn't getting high. And it was when God really started to talk to me.
Do you think it was the fact you were also unable to get your drugs that helped clean you out a little bit, and then maybe you were able to listen to a little bit, and start to get involved in recovery?
Absolutely. Because I hadn't gone for years without either a drink or a drug, or even if it wasn't that, it was the chase in my mind. So there was no time for quiet. And that's exactly what it was. And that's why I say it was the thing that led to the thing, because God kind of hid me in that secret place, if you will, to allow me to start to feel again, to start to deal with emotions again, because alcohol and drugs are such a great suppressor of emotions. And I was on autopilot for 12 years. Just get your drugs, no matter what. It didn't matter the cost. And so, yeah, absolutely, it was a time for that.
Now, you mentioned a doctor that I know about, never met him personally, but you mentioned Dr. Bernard Nathanson. Tell the audience who he was and how he was involved, intertwined in your own life.
I will. So fast forward. So, I got out of jail. I can tell you this. I can remember sitting on the curb. I got out of jail. I met my pimp boyfriend. We walked across the street to the Pizza Hut. We drank a pitcher of beer and I wrote a bad check. And 20 minutes later, I was in a crack house getting my head beat in. Now that will tell you why I said it was the thing that led to the thing. But here's what happened. God touched my heart unknowingly, really, while I was incarcerated. And I walked out of that crack house and I sat on the curb. And I looked up and I said, Lord, if you're there, you either take me or you change me, because I can't live like this anymore. And that was the beginning of me moving into what we'll talk about later, a whole new life. I like to use the phrase, I went from the crack house to the state house. And I did. I served on a state subcommittee in the state of Virginia that studied prisoner reentry, in the Commonwealth. But God was able to change my life so much. So during the last 20 years, one of the opportunities that I had was to host a radio show. and it was entitled, "This Is Your Life, Courage to Change." And my co-host and I would interview people who just use courage, just like you're doing, Brian, just people who relied on God and really used that courageous spirit to change their life. And so, much like you're doing this month, being the pro life month and support of life, I was doing a series of shows on the pro life movement, and I had a gal on who I was interviewing, and she started talking about NARAL, who the National Association for the Repeal of Abortion Laws, and I didn't know that much about it then. All I knew is that I had multiple abortions, and I had very slowly started to deal with that. And I believe God had forgiven me for that through a lot of work and repentance. And anyway, she started to talk about the organization NARAL, and she said it was co-founded by a doctor named Dr. Bernard Nathanson. So I listened, and she explained that Dr. Nathanson was part of a group. He was an OBGYN, and he and Larry Lader, which interestingly enough, I don't know how these shows will fall into order, but I know one of your guests talks a lot about Margaret Sanger. Catherine Davis talks an awful lot about that. And Lawrence Lader was very good buddies with Margaret Sanger, the queen, the godmother, if you will, of eugenics. And Lawrence Lader had a deep desire to see eugenics move forward. Now, Bernard Nathanson was an OBGYN, and he had really, I believe, manipulated Bernard Nathanson because Dr. Nathanson's heart was to help women who found themselves in, quote, unwilling and unplanned pregnancies. But so I'm listening to this, to my guest share this information. And she said that how NARAL really was able to establish abortion on demand in New York and paved the way in consequently for Roe v. Wade was by getting laws passed. And here's how they did it. Boy, this sounds so familiar as to what's going on today. They did it with a marketing scheme, if you will. They first of all, Bernard Nathanson and Larry Lader and NARAL, they absolutely knew that it was a baby and it was a life, but they had to somehow make people believe that it was not an existing human being. And so they came up with this great scheme. It was a media scheme. They used the media to push forward the slogans like, "It's my body and my choice." And this is what really got me. Bernard Nathanson said that they sat around in a room, a bunch of men sitting around a table, almost laughing, saying, "Let's come up with some sexy slogans that will make women believe that it's their right and their choice to have an abortion." And that choice, my right, my body, my right, my body, that is from those meetings that those sayings were established. The next thing was they falsified statistics. They were saying that about 10,000 women a year were having illegal abortions. In fact, 200 to 250 women a year were having illegal abortions. They were saying that women all over the country were in favor of this. They would pay women to walk in front of the abortion clinics with signs, "My body, my choice." And you know, Brian, how it is. You hear a lie long enough and it starts to become truth to you. And they were experts at this, experts at it. And of course, in every story, there has to be a villain. So they came up with, quote, the Catholic strategy, that Catholics were in favor of abortion, that it was the Vatican that was against it. So they took all of this media hype and they pushed it constantly. And it was so effective that it literally changed the laws in the state of New York to have abortion on demand up to the 24th week. Now, I'm listening to this story, and I had never heard the name of Dr. Bernard Nathanson, but I'm telling you, it was like an epiphany for me. The lights came on, and I said, oh my gosh, I bought every single lie that those people peddled. And Brian, I didn't do it just once, I did it 5 times. And I believed deep down in my heart that it was nothing more than a mass of cells and a clump of cells and a mass of tissue. And that's what was fed to me. So Bernard Nathanson initially left a very, very bad taste in my mouth. And I had to find out more and do more research about him. Hence led to the book that I wrote with my co-author, Kathy Gray, Light in Our Darkness. That's how I heard the name of Dr. Bernard Nathanson. And even more entwined in that, Dr. Bernard Nathanson was referring women to a doctor in Washington, D.C., Dr. Milan Vojt. And I'm telling you, I'm reading the abortion papers one night, a book that Dr. Nathanson wrote, and I came across that name, and I almost fell out of the chair. Dr. Vojt had performed my very first abortion, and I was astounded and dumbfounded by the deception that had been peddled by this organization that millions of women bought and millions of babies were murdered because of it. And you know, when you get something like that in your spirit, you have to do something with it. And that's what prompted us to write our book, Light in Our Darkness.
You know, Lisa, I heard a bioethicist talk one day about how it is so important how we choose our words, because that sets up the battle lines. That's exactly what you're talking about. You know, they knew that it would never sell. We're going to kill a baby. We're going to kill a living, viable human being.
Right.
Or no, it's just a bunch of cells. And the same thing, even on the other end now with euthanasia, it's, quote, mercy killing. We're being kind and compassionate. I even heard as a physician years ago, one of the arguments for abortion was that it was an act of mercy, because the thought was that many of the babies that were being aborted were unwanted and they would eventually be abused. And therefore we were being merciful by killing them. And so it's a distorted, sick logic. But in fairness to Dr. Nathanson, he, like Norma McCorvey, had their own epiphany before they died, didn't they?
Absolutely. And, you know, Bernard Nathanson oversaw 75,000 abortions. He had a very heavy weight on his shoulders. And at the time, like I said, he really felt as though he was doing the right thing. That was until the sonogram made its way to the United States. And that was in the early 70s. And he used the sonogram, and he realized almost immediately that he had 2 patients in the room, the mother and the child. And I love, he uses this phrase. He says, I began the painful process of changing my mind. And I thought that is so powerful for today, because I believe that that's really how hard it is. It is a painful process to change your mind when you have believed something so heinous is the right thing to do, to finally say, I may not be right. And he started to study fetology, and he started to realize that, you know, they were performing surgery on one floor of the hospital, and they were murdering a baby at the same age of gestation in the floor beneath. But what really got Dr. Nathanson, and this is so powerful for us as we witness to other people, he said, I watched the people, the pro-life people in front of the abortion clinics. And he said, they were so kind to one another. They were so loving to one another. And he said, I wanted to be in that atmosphere. He said, all I thought was, he goes, I wasn't really thinking about God at that point, but I was thinking about these are the kind of people that I want to have in my life. I mean, is that a powerful witness to us as Christians and believers that people are watching us? They want, everybody wants love. Everybody wants to be loved. And so as he started this painful process of changing his mind, he was introduced to a few different priests, and one in particular, John McCloskey, that knew that he was an intellect, and that was going to be the way he was going to get to his spirit. And he did. He fed him book after book after book, and Bernard ended up converting to Catholicism late in life. And he literally tried to rein in what he had unleashed on America, but he had been blackballed. Sounds familiar today too. The media just shut him down, and he wrote many books, but he was also, like I said, an intellect. His books, you have to use a dictionary to get through one of his books because he just was so intense. But oh, his heart was amazing. Oh, it was amazing. He just, in the Deacon Keith Fournier wrote the epilogue to our book, and he was friends with Dr. Nathanson. And when I met with Deacon Fournier, he said to me, he said, Lisa, he said, he was in the sanctuary, and he said, I walked in from the back of the church, and he was kneeling, and he was sobbing. And this was after he had, converted. I mean, this is years after he converted. And he was sobbing because he knew, oh, it brings me to tears. He knew the weight from which he was forgiven. And he knew what he had done was so heavy. It wasn't that he didn't believe he was forgiven, but he still carried the weight of the seriousness of what God had forgiven him from. Isn't that awesome?
He even aborted one of his own children, I believe, didn't he?
He did hit one of his kids. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Martin Luther King had said that darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can, and darkness cannot drive out hate, only love can.
That's right.
And I think I go back to what you just said about the sidewalk people, that, it's important we speak in truth, but it has to be in love. And when people look at us, they need to see Jesus Christ. And when we look at them, we need to see Jesus Christ as well. So God works in powerful and mysterious ways, and you're a perfect example. Just maybe summarize, what are you doing now with your nonprofit? Tell us about that.
Well, so I actually don't have a nonprofit. I did have a nonprofit. I ran a home for women reentering from incarceration. I did that for 10 years. Of course, they all laughed at me and they said, well, Lisa, nobody is going to help a convicted felon that was convicted of forgery and give you money to do anything. And I said, well, that's not what God told me. He told me to do it and that he would provide. What is the saying that God doesn't call the equipped, he equips the called? And oh my gosh, if I'm not one of those people. But I had this drive in me to go back and to help that were reentering from incarceration. So I said I founded a home and I ran that for close to 10 years. And then I wrote my first book, which is This Is Your Life. Overcome. No, I don't even know the book I wrote. This is Your Life, Not a Dress Rehearsal. Overcoming the Myths of Addiction was my first book. And that was basically kind of a bridge from doing the home for women, moving into the prisons themselves. And, because of the connections that really the Lord had allowed me to have, I was able to become a government contractor with the Department of Corrections in the Commonwealth of Virginia, which let me tell you, that just does not happen as a convicted felon. And I'm a small women-owned minority business, which, when I say this stuff, you have to remember I came from living on the streets, not taking a bath, stealing from, trash cans to eat, to now being a contractor with the Department of Corrections. If God isn't a miracle worker, I mean, I'm living proof that he can change anyone who has a willing heart. And so for the last 10 years, I've been going into anywhere from 10 to 19 prisons a year teaching reentry, overcoming the obstacles of reentry. I do a class, and I have to tell you, every time I think I'm going to move away from that, I can't, because there is just such a hunger and a thirst for righteousness behind the walls of incarceration, and there is. I come out of there getting way more than I could ever give, and I'm so grateful to God for that. And I'm praying that that never stopped. That I've been able to share my story and relate to a lot of people who feel abandoned, who feel alone and unloved.
I want to comment, just to make our viewers aware, that under the solo episodes on the website, Hope, Healing, and Mercy, drbrianthatcher.com, is a series of shows I did called The Message of Divine Mercy, God's Mercy and the Healing of Addictions. And it's 13 shows. The first show is on a history of AA. And then the next 12, each show is on one of the steps, and it brings in scripture and the writings of God's mercy. And I'm reminded of a quote St. Faustina had written in her spiritual diary: "Oh, my Jesus, my only hope." When we talk about hope, healing, and mercy, like you, like me, like so many of us, we look for love and hope in the wrong places. And Jesus is our hope. But she wrote, "Thank you for the book which you have opened before my soul's eyes. That book is your passion, which you underwent for love of me." Like you, like me, we look at ourselves sometimes and we think we're nothing but a lump of coal. But through the heat and the trials and the sufferings of life, God turns, through his love and mercy, that coal into another type of carbon, a beautiful diamond. And you're a beautiful diamond in the rough. And I hope everyone can come today to listen to your story and just realize that we're all on the path to holiness. Some are farther along than others. Mm-hmm. Let God do the judging. Any closing comments that you'd like to tell the viewers?
Well, yeah, I was thinking about this, and we live in an age where human beings are viewed basically with different levels of value. If one person seems to be more valuable than another person, and especially in what's going on now, and I don't want to get too controversial, but God made one human race, and he loves us dearly. He hung on that cross so that we could have freedom. And I remember the day that I realized that Jesus died for me. And he said, "Lisa, I would have hung on that cross if you were the only person on this planet. That's how much I love you." And what I want to tell people is it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where you are, who you are, what color you are, what you've done, how dirty you think the things that you've created because of your actions are, that Jesus can wash you clean. And I am, like I said, living proof. You could have never told anyone that knew me 30 years ago that I would be the woman that I am today. But Brian, I wake up every day full of joy. I can't wait for the day to unfold. I spend time with the Lord in the morning, and he's with me every step of the way. He is our hope, and he will never leave you, and he will never, ever forsake you.
Amen to that. So for those of you who may be discouraged, afraid, think of yourselves as nothing but a lump of coal. Just remember, you're a beautiful diamond. We're all under transformation and refining. And Lisa, I just want to thank you again for joining us today on Hope, Healing, and Mercy. You can get Lisa's book, Light in Our Darkness, at Lisa Kratz, that's Kratz Thomas.com. And love to have you back down the road and share more. We didn't really even get into addictions and things like that. We got a lot to talk about.
I know.
Thank you so much for joining, and God bless all of you.
Thank you so much.